Good evening. We are here at our Town Board of the Town of Ossining work session for January 5th, 2021, our first meeting of the year. If everybody could please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Also, if we could just have a moment of silence for Jean Payne, who was a councilman in Ossining. Thank you. Jean was
Jean
Payne was a councilman in Ossining, I think in the late 70s, early 80s. Councilman Wiltshire, did you know him?
No, but I have heard the name.
Apparently,
I didn't know.
Yeah, he passed away on New Year's Day, and he was living in Florida with his wife of 28 years, Rosalie, with whom he had founded a travel agency in 2006. He's survived by his son Billy and his daughter Lyda and his many nieces and nephews. He was predeceased by his son Malcolm. According to past town supervisor Honorable Richard Wishney, Councilman Payne was very active with youth sports in Ossining and a very popular umpire in the softball leagues. He was known for his kind heart and cheerful smile. And so we observed a moment of silence on his passing. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
I'm just going to start with a few announcements and then we'll get into our work session topics for this evening. Today is Tuesday, January 5th, 2021, which the town of Ossining has named Manuel de Cruz Day in honor of the Ossining Volunteer Fire Department's outgoing chief engineer, Manny de Cruz. Manny has been an important figure in the Ossining Fire Department for many years, serving as second assistant chief in 2015 and 16, first assistant chief in 2017 and 18, and chief engineer in 2019 and 2020. We are so thankful for his continued service to Ossining residents. And we wish our congratulations and best of luck to our new chief engineer, Scott Gallery, who took the reins just a few days ago. So thank you to all of our fantastic volunteer firefighters and especially our chiefs. This week, New York State began distributing the second dose of the COVID-19 vaccine to healthcare workers. And I do believe that I saw Councilwoman Feldman just got hers today. Is that correct?
Got my first dose today.
First dose today, and you have 3 weeks till your booster?
28 days.
Okay, 28 days. So residents and staff in nursing homes are expected to receive their first rounds of the vaccine this week and next, and all healthcare workers are now approved to receive the vaccine. As a reminder, vaccines are not yet available to the general population, and we have been getting some questions about that already. There is no sign up for the vaccine. You cannot pay to get it ahead of others. Please be aware of potential scams promising to help you skip the line or reserve a dose. No government agencies are contacting people to offer these services. New York State has a dedicated webpage for all things vaccine, so you can visit covid19vaccine.health.ny.gov for updated information. We will also continue to share out information once it becomes available about mass distribution of the vaccine. Cases across the country are continuing to rise as a result of gatherings for the holidays. Big surprise. Dr. Fauci has given us a sober warning that January may be one of our most challenging months of the pandemic. If you attended a gathering, please get tested, even if you do not have symptoms. And please continue to stay home as much as possible. Avoid both small and large gatherings and monitor how you feel daily, and do not go out if you feel sick. And we know that other strain has made its way, the strain of the virus has made its way to New York. We heard about it up in Saratoga. So we don't know where it's going to land next, but apparently it's more contagious. And I know that everybody already is well aware of these facts. So we need to continue to be as vigilant as possible. Westchester Medical Center is offering testing at the Ossining Community Center this Friday, January 8th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. and not too far away also in Peekskill at the Field Library on Saturday, January 9th. For both events, you have to call in advance to make a reservation, 914-202-4530, or visit westchestermedicalcenter.org. Testing is also available on Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays at Star of Bethlehem Church in Ossining. And I do believe you have to make a reservation for that as well. And I think that there's a number that you can text directly to. COVID-19 testing is free for all New York State residents. There are also several other convenient testing locations in Ossining. You can use the state Find a Test Near You feature to schedule an appointment at CVS, the Community Center, Health Smart Pharmacy, or Open Door. Before we launch into our agenda tonight, I wanted to take a moment to reflect, as I had mentioned I was going to do, on some of our accomplishments from 2020 and look ahead at some of our goals for the new year. 2020 was certainly a challenging year. I don't think anybody's going to challenge me on that one. But I am proud to say that Team Town was not only able to adapt to our changing environment, but in many ways excel and push forward new and important projects. I'm going to go through a couple of our major accomplishments and plans looking ahead, but keep an eye out for future town board meetings, which will highlight some of these efforts in more depth in the coming weeks. Most of our offices launched virtual platforms, most notably our town clerk's office, which quickly rolled out the Seamless Docs platform in March and April to provide online access to most of their forms and permits. The tax receiver's office saw record numbers of online payments during the April and September collections, and they would also like to remind everyone that your second half school taxes are due January 31st, and online payment is your best bet for safe and nearly instant gratification payment. Other town offices went out of their way to adapt their operations to allow for fewer or no in-person offerings in order to keep our visitors and staff as safe as possible. We also worked with the county and the state on extensions to help people with taxes, assessments, and the like during the height of the shutdown, and also to distribute PPE, as we talked about at the last meeting, and other important information and food. We even managed to complete our second townwide reassessment during the pandemic. Big shout outs to our receivers and assessors offices for all their hard work adapting. Our highway department continues to do the less visible but critically important work a municipality provides its residents. During this past year, even with some split shifts and other accommodations to protect our staff against COVID exposure, Highway Superintendent Pete Connolly has helped make our roadways safer. He led important efforts like the guide rail and street sign replacement projects, and of course, daily monitoring of our sewer lift stations and responding swiftly to weather events like Tropical Storm Isaias and our few winter storms at the end of December. In 2021, we will embark on one of our most complex highway infrastructure projects in many years, the McCarthy Drive rehabilitation. We will be hearing from our town engineer, Paul Fraioli, in a few weeks regarding bid results and next steps to move this project along in 2021. We will also be undertaking the replacement of 2 generators at sewer lift stations, which are essential to the continual operation of our sewer infrastructure, even if a station loses power. Superintendent Connolly also oversaw the beginning of our Dale Cemetery Superintendent's Cottage restoration, which is coming along beautifully thanks to the good work of Stephen Tilley Architects and Tom Clements from Clemco. Restoration project at Dale, maintaining the beauty of this historic yet active cemetery, which unfortunately also saw an uptick in burials this past year. Our Parks Department was at their busiest as parks were essentially closed for all organized sports, then quickly permitted to open for many. Clearly, we had an explosion in use, not only with individuals looking to connect in a safer outdoor environment, but also those looking to get their fitness fix in at our new adult fitness equipment at Engle Park and Buck Johnson. Our Parks Department started new cleaning and sanitizing protocols to try to keep up with the increased use and keep our parks safe. And we installed many more refuse and recycling containers. We even got our new fishing dock installed in the middle of the pandemic at Cedar Lane Park, which was a long time coming, and quite incredible that we managed to do that when the dock company from Maine had to come down in the middle of, I think they were, I don't know, there were all sorts of restrictions at the time, but they managed to get it done. We did have to go virtual for our concert series, but had a lot of fun promoting local restaurants on Facebook Live, as well as our local musicians who were able to perform from their own spaces and provide some solace to music lovers on summer Fridays in July. Thanks to the Risco Music for their help. This fall, we held our first park stewardship event with the help of Donna Sharrett from our planning board at Ryder Park. and Ingela Rodriguez as well, another neighbor. And that was to help combat invasives. We also had our park staff on hand to help with that. And we found a couple of willing volunteers to step up into leadership positions and launch a town park stewardship program, which we were hoping will result in volunteer days at multiple town parks to help us care for areas harder to keep up with, including Sally Swope Park, our sitting park, which we are also undertaking a lot of restoration there, actually started in late fall and is continuing into the winter. We are so grateful for our volunteer-spirited town. A project I am most excited about, and I hope the rest of the board is too, is our town's comprehensive plan entitled Sustainable Ossining, which kicked off in 2020 and will continue full steam into 2021. Last year, we assembled our steering committee, brought on an outside planning consultant, and dove into the hard work of evaluating our existing conditions. We also held our first public engagement session via Zoom in November with 90 attendees and pushed out a survey that garnered nearly 400 responses. In the coming weeks, we're going to turn to more focused outreach with some key stakeholders like Green Ossining, our Environmental Advisory Committee, business owners, school district, youth, and our Equity Committee, among others. Please continue to remain engaged on this project in the new year. We can't wait to hear from you and develop a collective vision for our town's future. With the horrific deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, to name just a few, our Community Equity Task Force took on greater significance and garnered many more interested participants this past year. We discussed ways to engage our community on issues of equity and distributed a survey to identify areas in which our residents felt we needed to focus particular attention. The task force intends to use the survey to focus its goals and objectives for our work in 2021. The amount of engagement by our younger community members on this issue has been extremely heartening. Our Food Scraps program launched last February and quickly adapted to offer online ordering and curbside pickup of composting kits at Cedar Lane Park and at our farmers market. The Ossining community is filling upwards of 12 65-gallon toters every week of compostable materials. In 2021, we have signed on to an agreement with the county to take advantage of reduced hauling fees and will continue to partner with T10 and Green Ossining to expand educational outreach on this exciting program into the community. Understanding the impact of our refuse is an important part of reducing refuse overall and reducing our carbon impact, tying into the state's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or CLCPA goals. To that end, we approved a resolution towards the end of the year allowing Ossining 100 to be formed as an arm of Cure 100, originally launched by Croton 100. Cure stands for Communities Uniting to Reduce Emissions. And the carbon tracker they have created is a way each individual resident of the town can look at our own carbon footprint to evaluate how we can reduce it. We will continue to partner with Cure 100 and Sustainable Westchester to do our part locally to meet the state's very ambitious and laudable climate goals. We are also planning to launch the Ossining Briarcliff Energy Smart Homes Initiative on January 28th to help our residents understand options to make their heating and cooling systems more energy efficient, less expensive, and also it will make homes more comfortable. We know residential emissions from traditional fossil fuel powered systems are one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, so getting ahead of the curve is a way each of us can make an impact. We are also looking forward to ordering our newest electric vehicle, a new bus for our senior nutrition program, partially paid for by community development block grant monies through the county. We hope the new bus will be on hand in time for and ready for our opening up our back to in-person activities once again this summer for our senior nutrition program. When Ossining residents receive their town tax bill in April 2021, you will see a tax rate decrease. These have definitely been some uncertain months as we navigate the complex fiscal environment of COVID, but we are cautiously optimistic that our department's careful budgeting, ability to borrow for capital projects at historic low interest rates, and continued growth of the tax base will be able to continue to provide excellent service to our residents while smoothing the tax impact for all. We have also relied strongly on grants to complete important projects without overburdening taxpayers. Since I became supervisor, we have brought in over $1 million in grant funding. And although the grant landscape slowed down in 2020 with budget cuts on county, state, and federal levels, we were pleased to learn in December that we were the recipients of $33,750 in grant funding from the DEC's Urban and Community Forestry Program for tree maintenance in our parks. In 2021, we will keep a close eye on developments at higher levels of government to look under every rock, as we always do, for outside funding, as we all hopefully will recover from the economic impacts of the pandemic. Big shout out to Victoria Caffarelli in my office for all her excellent work on our grants to date. And finally, my board colleagues and I, after adapting to our new Zoom platform, introduced some new pieces of legislation in 2020 to help our local businesses facilitate outdoor dining, ease restrictions on hiring for much needed court personnel, and approve the town's very first large-scale solar development with a canopy solar system at Maryknoll Fathers and Brothers, or approve the floating zone to allow it to happen. Our agenda items tonight delve into some of our legislative priorities that have carried over from last year into 2021. In addition to the beekeeping legislation and battery energy storage systems legislation, we hope to introduce new topics for discussion in the coming weeks and months, including revising and revisiting our events and vendor legislation, our film permitting process to encourage more filming in the town, and green building codes. Our goals continue to be improving our community to offer a safe, healthy, equitable, and sustainable place to live, work, visit, and play for all. And that is it for my overview of all our accomplishments in this very difficult time. Do any of my board members want to share any announcements or any other thoughts or anything that I might have missed? All right.
Anything.
Say it again.
I said, I don't think you missed anything.
Thank you, Councilman. Okay. So anyhow, with that, we have a short but potentially interesting discussion tonight on 2 or 3 work session topics. The first one is a discussion of our proposed beekeeping legislation. We have our town planner with us here this evening, Valerie Menastra from Nelson Pope Voorhees, and we're going to continue our discussion on this legislation to allow beekeeping in the town of Ossining. We have received additional comments from members of the public, and I'm hoping that Valerie can summarize some of these comments and maybe review one more time how you constructed our initial draft and how it has changed since the first draft in response to feedback, and maybe recommend a few final changes to consider tonight. But just before we get into that, I just want to remind everybody that one of the main reasons that we introduced beekeeping legislation was because we learned over the course of the last couple months that there's a number of beehives that are being kept in the town, and we wanted to find a way to make that legal so that we don't have to penalize people for doing something. We are trying to make it make sense, but we have had inputs from various sides of the beekeeping coin, I guess you could say. And so we're looking to find some sort of a balance, something constructive that we can start with. And as with any kind of legislation, especially this kind of legislation, I think what we'll do is we'll put it into place. And then if amendments need to be made to it, they can be if we find that it's causing problems for either beekeepers or our neighbors without bees. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our fantastic planner, Valerie Menastra.
Thank you very much. So I'll start off with just in general, this piece of legislation has gone through a number of different edits. We specifically started looking at, I specifically started looking at communities that are either, close to the town of Ossining, the village of Ossining, which has a beekeeping legislation, as well as the town of Greenberg and the village of Montebello, specifically because they had similar properties where you had larger scale properties that actually had beekeeping taking place on them, and wanting to deal with, legalizing those types of uses and the parameters in which they were dealing with the larger scale properties, which are slightly different than some of the village of Ossining properties. So with that, I provided a draft for the board, and based upon a couple public hearings and comments received from both the public as well as the beekeeping community, we had a number of revisions, specifically rolling back a number of the restrictions dealing with colony density and maximums and minimums of the number of beehives that you can have on a property, as well as removing setbacks, specifically dealing with side yard setbacks and rear yard setbacks for the hives. We did keep the front yard, no hives within the front yard setback. And we also rolled back a number of other restrictions dealing with registrations and the information that you would need for the registration. So at this point, the last public hearing, or the last time the public hearing was open, there were some initial additional comments that came in, and I wanted to review those with the board tonight based upon what you heard at the public hearing, as well as some subsequent communications. So the first thing I wanted to touch upon is you did receive one comment specifically dealing with section 3B. And this raised the question of a dimensional sketch that we are requiring as part of the overall beekeeping registration. And the question was whether that was overly restrictive. This particular dimensional sketch is similar to what the Village of Ossining requires as part of its beekeeping registration. So at this point in time, unless the board has any concerns with feeling that it is overly restrictive or unnecessary to have an applicant provide a dimensional sketch of where the hives will be kept, I would recommend keeping that particular requirement within the code. For tonight,
And just to clarify, a sketch could be a hand-drawn 8 by 15 by
right.
whatever.
It does not require the
An architect.
local laws. Right. It's not requiring an architect or a survey or anything like that.
Okay, it's just like a sketch. Like literally you could do it on, I mean, you probably wouldn't want to do it on the back of a napkin, but you could provide a sketch of the overall size and whatever dimensions.
Yes, that's correct.
Hence dimensional sketch.
Yes.
I think that that's reasonable. Does anybody have any thoughts on that matter? Anybody think that is not reasonable?
Totally reasonable.
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 Okay, dimensional sketch is in.
The second comment that also came in was specifically dealing with the flyaway barriers. There was some concern about how bees might not necessarily be able to be controlled by flyaway barriers, and how do you really identify a bee's path in a particular required direction. The barrier itself is something that the Village of Ossining also has within their code, as well as every code that I actually researched, as well as this flyaway barrier also got support from the beekeeping community. Really, it's just what we're requiring as part of this is that the beekeeper must establish a flyaway barrier adjacent to hives, controlling the bee flight pathway away from the property. It can be a solid vegetation or any combination of the two forces that the bee's flight path in a desired direction. And I think the desired direction is really, it's vague on purpose so that a particular beekeeper can identify what direction they want their particular hive to fly.
Away from the property or away from their neighbor's property?
Well, I mean, right now we don't have it specifically defined because I think it will just depend on the exact location of the hive. Because if you recall that, a number of the beekeepers said sometimes it's better to have a hive closer to the house, sometimes it's further away, sometimes, it can vary depending upon the property. So it's really just focusing on the specific direction that the beekeeper.
So if we're not, I'm just wondering, all right, if we're not specifically saying what we're trying to get them not to fly near, then why are we building it?
I believe the concept behind the flyaway barrier is that if you don't have one, then the bees could just leave their hive. And if they're not forced in a particular upward direction, they would then, I guess, horizontally, their direction will be first horizontally going through the property. And then if, depending on the size of the property, it could go to the neighboring property.
Okay.
Easier. If we want,
And that's in every legislation that you found?
Right. I mean, Valerie, you said that the language is a little different than, do you know if there's something specific that is
yeah, from the village, the one sentence that's different from the village is it can be solid vegetative or any combination of the two forces. The village regulation just says requires a flyaway barrier.
Okay.
So it doesn't
Hmm.
specifically define what the structure of the barrier can be made of.
I mean, the definition of defining it isn't that. It just gives you options. So I don't think that the additional description is hindering it. I
No,
mean,
that's why
No.
it's essentially the same thing.
I guess the question could be, should it say something more restrictive that the flyaway barrier is specifically, you know, specifically to control, it says to control the path of, it just doesn't say if it's, so, you know, how. I think that's what Councilwoman Feldman is saying, right? You're saying it doesn't really tell you to control it to.
Well, I'm just, well, it makes sense that, to make it go up so that they're not going ground level where people might be walking. So if a barrier is to make them fly higher and over people's heads, I guess that makes some sense. If most of the beekeeping legislations have it, I'm guessing there's a real reason for it when you ask real beekeepers. So of one, I am not.
And this is what I received. Again, I'm not a beekeeper as well. And so this is the feedback I received from both from the beekeepers as well as the, looking at the other legislations, other legislative efforts.
I was just trying to understand, what the thought was. Was it trying to stop it from going to the neighbor's property or trying to stop it to go to a sidewalk?
Right, so I think ideally
And that's
it's
not
supposed to
defined.
prevent, right, I think ideally it's supposed to prevent from going to directly to the neighbor's property or a sidewalk or wherever that would, I believe I guess.
These might be a nuisance.
Right, where the nuisance would occur.
Okay.
But I don't necessarily, I think the issue is it's a little difficult to put something in that away from any potential nuisance, because then that opens up, I think another can of worms as well, what's the nuisance? And so I think to some extent it allows discretion for the beekeepers to decide.
Didn't the village have a sentence in there somewhere that said according to best practices? Can't we just throw that in there?
Sure, we can do that. And
I do think that there's, yes,
I don't even know that we need it, but
something a little higher up, but sure.
yes, I can add that.
According to best beekeeping practices, sure.
So then the next comment was about the food source, that they had still concerns with the requirement that a beekeeper will make sure that a garden of native pollinator species is provided for the hive or hives. And I think that particular issue has been dealt with in our current legislation, because right now it just says each beekeeper shall ensure that a convenient source within the apiary property area or near the hive or hives of food that consists of a native pollinator species is provided for the hive or hives. So it doesn't necessarily require a garden, it just requires that a source of food, so it can be any sort of native pollinator species, is provided for the hives.
Yeah, there's some that you say that's that place that there's some little typo that we saw.
Yes, I'm gonna edit that.
Okay. I think you need to say these plants shall consist of instead of they plants. There's just another little typo, but yeah,
Yes.
it's just that. Okay. I think that's fine, because again, you're not saying that it has to be planted. You're just saying that you ensure that there's a source.
That's correct. And it's not necessarily requiring a garden, there just has to be a source.
Right. So you could have a field of
It could be-
clover and that could be
Right.
sufficient.
It could be shrubs, exactly.
Right. Okay. I think that that's a reasonable compromise between where we started and where we are.
Okay.
Everybody else good with that?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So the next comment is specifically dealing with, there is a piece in our legislation where we talk about the beekeepers should purchase bees of, honeybee genetics, not the Africanized bees. But we do have a sentence in there that applicants should include documentation with the permit to verify apiary origin of mated queens and packaged bees, including the seller's contact information. And there was a concern raised that if for some reason that a beekeeper happens to end up taking a swarm hive that has swarmed on another person's property, that there would clearly be no documentation associated with it. So the recommendation is to remove that particular sentence from that requirement.
Wasn't there also a concern in like a previous memo about that Africanized bee, or was that not a concern? I remember somebody saying something about that too, and that we were just being too.
Yeah.
Right, but that was a previous, I'm only dealing with the new comments now. I think that was a previous comment that was raised a couple public hearings ago, but I believe this board decided to keep the language that we have. But this is dealing with another section of that.
All right.
Quite honestly, I'd like to start as simple as we can and then, you know, add if we need to, if we find we're
Sure.
having problems.
So I can remove that sentence.
I mean, I think you should just leave that first one. Pursue the purchase and keeping of bees must be mindful of honeybee genetics and defensive honeybee behavior.
And then just remove all of A.
And just say beekeepers must act responsibly to limit the spread of defensive and other undesirable bee genetics. You know, just something like that.
I think that gets, I would either say we remove all of A, or you remove the last sentence, which is just the applicant should include documentation, and leave in beekeepers pursuing the purchase and keeping of bees must be mindful of genetics and defensive behavior.
Okay. Being mindful is just, sure. Yes, let's just remove that last sentence then,
Okay.
about the documentation.
Okay.
I'm open. All right.
Liz, did you have another?
I'm
thought?
okay with removing the
The
whole
whole thing? Okay.
thing, but you know, whatever.
Well, what-
I'm okay with, I think it's probably in best practices not to have.
That's what I was
No.
looking for. I was looking for Mr. Gonzalez, who just joined us.
Right. We can
Not
actually ask
timing.
about the flyaway barrier.
We're talking about bees again, Fernando.
You're
Can we
muted.
just go back? Let's just go back. We were talking about our requirement to have a flyaway barrier, and we were trying to figure out the justification for requiring it, because we didn't know if we should actually put in more language to say the flyaway barrier directs bees away from neighboring properties, or just is it that just the flyaway barrier sends them all shooting up into up instead of out? Are you muted? I think you're muted. Fernando?
You're muted,
Muted.
Fernando.
We didn't hear anything.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, the barrier should be in front. It doesn't have to be a fence. It could be a natural barrier such as bushes. In my case, my barrier, I don't need a barrier, but I do have a fence, electric fence, to prevent bears from eating my beehives. But it could be bushes. And basically what it does is the bees' approach to the hive is high, and then they go down into it. And when they leave, they go up the same way rather than straight out.
Okay.
So, you know, I don't think the language should be so complicated, but basically the barrier should be, you know, in front of the entrance to the beehives, and so as to make the bees to come in high and into it, and when they leave, they go up high over the barrier and away from, you know, lessens the chance of going over the neighbor's property, I guess.
Okay. Well, we just say that the beekeeper must establish a flyaway barrier adjacent to hives, controlling the bee flight path away from the property. It can be solid, vegetative, or any combination of the two that forces the bee's flight path in a desired direction.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay.
But it's really not on their flyway, because once they leave the hive, their flyway is towards any flowers or nectar. So
Right.
you know, it's just a barrier in front of the hive, in front of the entrance to the hive, basically.
Well, it just says it forces the bee's flight path in a desired direction. So you're
Yeah,
right.
I mean, let me say that would not guarantee that they're going to go up and away. You know, if they may go up, but if the flower patch is right near there, they're going to go that way towards
Right. But it's just the way that you're kind of sending them like, hey, you're encouraging them to go in a direction versus
Yeah.
like you said, just like Heather and just like sort of all over the place, right?
Yes.
So they're coming in and going out. It's like the trap door for the doggy or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. For the most part, they will not be noticeable by the neighbors. Only, you know, in the case that they swarm in the spring, but if a beehive is properly managed, you minimize the risk of swarming.
Okay. All right. Let's go continue on, Valerie.
Okay.
Thanks, Fernando. Stand by for future questions.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm sorry. Where did we?
I'm sorry. We were
What did we
in.
We're on
decide to
A.
do with the 7A?
Okay. So 7A, beekeepers.
I think Liz said she'd be happy to remove that entire section.
About the genetics and defensive behavior.
Right.
Again, I'm fine with eliminating that. I don't,
Okay.
I think it's fine.
All right. So we'll remove that section.
I mean, I think the B of the B, I mean, 7B kind of gets at it a little bit if we're going to leave
Right.
that in, right?
Right. So 7B is also another comment. They had concerns with 7B, I believe it's 7B, I'm sorry, let me find it. 7B 1, 2, and 3. So they had concerns with it, seemed a little bit subjective and not really defined. This exact language was taken from the Village of Austening's B law and is in there, also in their permit.
I mean, to me, it's just guidance. So I
Yes.
think it's fine. And it says guidance concerning examples of nuisance activity in the field of beekeeping, including the following illustrative as opposed to comprehensive lists. So those are just examples. So I think that that's fine. You know, examples of what is nuisance behavior as far as bee is concerned.
Then the, does anybody else have any comments on that before I go on to the next comment?
No.
Okay. So the next comment really dealt with in 7C, and all existing and new apiaries will meet the required density, the required colony density. The commenter raised that that is probably left over from the prior versions of the local law when we actually had bee colony density, and I do agree with that. So that's something that I would recommend removing.
All right. And down.
Okay. That was all the comments I received from that one person. Then we also received a comment letter today. This one dealt with the term apiary versus the term hive. So this person sent a comment saying, while the Village of Austining, you know, the basis of their local law is based on apiaries, which I proposed to also have a very similar definition. They are suggesting that because technically an apiary is really more than one colony, so therefore more than one hive, that when we use it as a singular term, we are misusing the word apiary, and that we should use the word hive in place of apiaries throughout our local law.
Honestly, there is a definition right here of apiary.
Yes.
It
so
says a
there's
hive or hive-like structure, singular. I don't know.
right. So they're saying that technically its apiary can be more than one hive. And so their concern is that when we refer to an apiary as a singular term, that it really should just be, we should just use hive instead of apiary.
I'm fine with that.
So if we do that, then I would suggest then we just remove the word apiary and we just replace it with hive, and then we have a definition of, the definition of hive is, you know, the original definition of apiary. We'll just have a hive is
A hive is a hive.
structure having removal, you know.
As long as it doesn't say a hive is a hive, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I'll make sure it doesn't say a hive is a
Okay, that's fine.
I did look up like apiary on, you know, and on the website as well, and it seems that the definition is technically a place where the bees live, and so it can include more than one hive.
Okay, fair.
Okay.
And then
All
there
right,
were
so-
other comments from the public hearing? Were you
Those
guys-
were no, yeah, no, there were no other comments from the public hearing. That was it.
Okay,
And I listened to the public hearing again today, just to make sure. So,
Thank you.
okay.
so with that, I'm going to suggest, and I'll make those final edits. I'll send those back. I can send those back within, like, you know, tomorrow to
Sure.
the board for your final review, and then
Great. And so our
maybe
next, we have one more public hearing scheduled on this, which is our January 26th meeting. And that's because our January 12th meeting, which is next week, is our reorganization meeting. And we tend to have a lengthy agenda. And we thought that we would be best served if we put it on a different meeting. So if my board colleagues are in agreement, unless we hear more significant comments at that public hearing or between now and then, we will likely be able to close the public hearing and even have, if we put the draft, the newest draft up on the website, we can have it out there for a couple of weeks. And then if we don't get anything more significant, we'll look to adopt the legislation maybe that same evening, if that sounds,
You want to have a resolution prepared for the 26th?
yes, please. Does that
Did we
make
get rid, question, did we get rid of the part where the honey produced off-site shall not be brought on-site?
no, we actually still have that in there. We specifically have that processing, bottling, labeling, shipping, or sale on site shall be limited to the products of the bees on site. Honey produced off site shall not be brought on site for sale or distribution.
Okay,
I mean, again, I think it's specifically the idea.
okay, as long as it said for sale or distribution.
Right, you're not having a commercial production going, you know, this is a hobby. This is for hobby beekeepers, not,
And that particular piece was put into the village. I mean, that came from, or well now, some iterative, it was in the village of Montebello, specifically because they had larger properties and people that had, you know, property owners that had numerous hives. And we already know we have 2 properties within the town of Ossining that have similar. Not to say that they would even, you know, consider that, but it just is an extra, you know, I think it just adds something to the protection to prevent it becoming commercialized.
good, everybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Alrighty then, so with that, I think we're moving into our discussion of the proposed battery energy storage system legislation, which Valerie is going to stick around with us to talk about. So just as a reminder, we are introducing this legislation, and I want to give you a little background. This is from NYSERDA's guidebook on energy storage systems, battery energy storage systems. New York State has established a 1,500 megawatt energy storage target by 2025 and a 3,000 megawatt target by 2030. Over $350 million in New York State incentives have been authorized to accelerate the adoption of energy storage systems in an effort to build a self-sustaining industry. Energy storage systems will serve many critical roles to enable New York's clean energy future, specifically as intermittent renewable power sources such as wind and solar provide a larger portion of New York's electricity. Energy storage systems will be used to smooth and time shift renewable generation and minimize curtailment. As New York's grid becomes smarter and more decentralized, these systems will dispatch stored energy when and where it is needed the most. Furthermore, energy storage systems will allow New York to meet its peak power needs without relying on its oldest and dirtiest peak generating plants, many of which are approaching the end of their useful lives and are sited in economic justice areas. As an important first step in protecting public and firefighter safety while promoting safe energy storage, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority developed the first comprehensive set of guidelines for reviewing and evaluating battery energy storage systems. And they also developed was derived. So we have received some public comments on this legislation since opening the public hearing at our most recent legislative session. Valerie, would you like to discuss some of the suggestions you have for changes to the draft based on some of the comments that we have received? And also, I just wanted to add that there is an application before the planning board for a battery energy storage system, which is part of what incentivized us to take this on at this point.
Okay, great, thank you. So we did receive a few comments. Again, the comments I'm going to go through are based upon comments that were submitted both through email and written form, as well as ones that were brought up at the last public hearing. So first, there was a comment or a question that they wanted to, a member of the public wanted to know if the safety features that are required or that are being promoted as part of the current application before the planning board would be located within the, or required as part of this local law. And the answer to that is yes. All the safety features that are being, or that are going to be put in place or being proposed to be put in place as part of the current application before the planning board would also be required as part of any new application before within the town for battery energy storage. The second question came dealing with lighting and concerns about that there should be some sort of dark sky initiative or dark sky guidelines or regulations as part of the battery energy storage systems, because they will require certain lighting just to make sure for safety purposes as also around the site. And so there is a section within the code that specifically talks about lighting, and originally the lighting just said lighting of the battery energy storage systems shall be limited to that shall be limited to lighting that minimally required for safety and operational purposes and shall be reasonably shielded, downcast from abutting properties. What I'm proposing to change it to is lighting of the battery energy storage systems shall be limited to lighting that minimally is required for safety and operational purposes and shall be reasonably shielded and reasonably shielded, downcasted, and not encroach on abutting properties. All lighting should be less than 3,000 kelvins. So the kelvins themselves are the actual color of the lighting. So it requires a warmer lighting, and also making sure that lighting does not encroach into the abutting properties would then prevent somebody from stating that, you know, that the lighting from that particular battery energy storage is actually on their property, or they see the lighting from their property boundaries.
Fair. I think that's a good
Sounds
addition.
good.
Okay. And that is similar to what we require in a lot of the, or what the town planning board requires in a lot of their planning board applications as well, or site plan approvals.
Excellent.
Okay, so then the other comment came in, there was a comment raised about noise, that, you know, the current regulations had some sort of noise restrictions, and how that really, those noise restrictions measured against the town's noise code. And truthfully, when I looked at the two and I did some sort of comparison prior to the original draft, and I felt that what was in that current local law, or what's in the battery energy storage local law, would actually adhere to what's in the noise chapter of the town code. But upon further review of it, it just makes sense to just refer to the noise chapter within the town code within this local law. And so what I've suggested doing is that the noise section would say the 1 hour average noise generation from a battery energy storage systems and components and associated ancillary equipment shall meet the requirements of Chapter 130 noise. And so it's just as simple as that. It refers to the noise chapter, and therefore you don't have to worry about having additional regulations or some sort of confusion between the two.
Okay, that makes sense to me too. Good.
So then the third comment came in with dealing with the zoning districts, specifically focused on whether right now we have and this is also currently in the town of Ossining zoning code for the solar energy systems tables, but right now we have limitations for the MF, MF1, NC, and GB1 districts are not allowed to have solar energy systems within them. And so the comments from the supervisor was, do we want to consider opening up and allowing all zoning districts to have potential battery energy storage? And if we were to do that, then I would suggest just keeping, right now we have for tier 2, minimum lot size is 4 acres. For tier 2, minimum setbacks is 100 feet. And for tier 2, maximum height is 15 feet on all the other zoning districts. And so I would suggest applying those same minimums and maximums to the MF, MF1, NC, and GB1 if you're considering we're expanding the allowable use to those other zoning districts.
That makes sense to me. I mean, again,
Okay, I mean, sorry, go ahead, Dana.
these are like storage containers. Is this a very different than a solar installation? You know, I think that it's like, you know, if you want to put a small storage facility or something like that on a property, I'm just not sure that it requires the same kind of restrictions as solar. But go ahead, Councilwoman Feldman, what were you?
Well, to your point, don't these go in conjunction with the solar system always?
No, not always.
Not always.
No. In fact,
Okay.
not this one, applications that's before the planning board right now is not
Right, it's
conjunction with-
standalone.
It's
Okay.
basically just to help, like, again, as I was mentioning, smooth the, you know, help store energy so that you can balance the flow and offset peak, you know, needs at peak and have a different source than just the main grid for energy. And you can store certain types of energy from solar, but it may not be direct at the moment. Some, you know, I think, like, for example, Club Fit is installing a solar system and they have a small battery energy storage, but not the same size as this one, because it's just specifically to store their own their solar intake.
Right, so I thought it was kind of going hand in hand with the solar, but now I understand that it's also an emergency backup battery to keep you going for a while. You can pull it off the grid as well and just store it.
Essentially, yes.
Yes.
Okay. So my question is, if we're going to put it into the zones that aren't currently allowed, could we put the floating thing where they have to be approved?
It is. That's
That's how
part of
it's
Right. That's what I'm saying. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, and just for clarification, tier 1 and tier 2 solar energy system is allowed in all your zoning districts. It's just
Okay. So it's
floating
a tier
cells
3.
application. Yeah, it's a tier 3. And so
Okay.
for the battery energy storage right now, the tier 1 would be allowed in all zoning districts. And based on what I'm hearing, we'll also allow for the tier 2 to be allowed for all zoning districts. And they'll have to come in for the application for a floating zone.
Okay.
Yeah,
That
all
makes
it does is make the properties eligible. You're still
Right.
through the same level of
Right.
review.
correct.
Right. As long as we have the same level of review.
Okay, so then I will do that, and I will have the same, I guess, the same parameters, the maximum, minimums, and heights applied to those zoning districts as well.
I guess that makes sense. I'm not 100% sure with this as with the solar, but I guess.
Well, I think, you know, again, I wasn't part of the initial discussions on the solar energy systems, but you know, looking at the districts that were specifically identified not to allow for the tier 3, probably really looked at, you know, your MF1s and your MF, your MF1 and your GB districts. They're small districts right now, and they already have, like, most of the properties already occupied, where a number of your other districts have more flexibility, I think, in actually landing the floating zone. And so I think that might have been part of the discussion or thought process in eliminating those other districts.
Okay. I'm good with that. Everybody else good? Any other comments from the board or discussion? Anything
Are
else?
you saying that these properties may not be big enough with the setbacks?
Well, I think, you know, your MF1, your MF2, I mean, those districts already have multifamily residential, you know,
Right.
housing on those properties. So down the line, you know, if those properties do change or alter, but I would think to a larger extent, there's probably less of a chance that those particular properties within those zoning districts are going to come back to the board for this type of application.
I mean, it depends.
Due to lack of
Cool.
space.
Yes, and yes,
And lot size.
yeah. And,
Right.
and just available property, you know, there's a lot more larger lots available in the other zoning districts.
Okay. So I'm wondering why we're doing it, but okay.
Well, I think the
I
question.
mean, for example, like, so, you know, a multifamily could find that they have a space. I don't know, maybe they want to get rid of their tennis court or something like that. And then they need a little extra income. And this is a way for them to, you know, to offer that in an area that may not be obtrusive or bother anybody. And then they have, you know, backup energy and again, can come off the grid and possibly offer essentially generator backup if anything does go wrong.
Right. I mean, I think the size that a typical solar farm, well, not a solar farm, but a solar installation, you know, ground mount solar installation, that would probably take up a larger area than your battery energy storage systems, at least the ones that I've seen proposed recently.
Right. I mean, to get the same bang for your buck, you need a much broader area for solar than you do for battery energy storage. Like I said, battery energy storage is like a container, you know, like a storage container kind of thing. And it's all contained. Whereas, you know, you can think of sprawling solar installation that you see where you know, to make it worthwhile, you need to have a certain amount of solar panels or it's not going to be worthwhile to build.
I get that. Well, and so if it's much smaller and less obtrusive, maybe we want to revisit the setbacks then.
That is possible. That's kind of what I was saying. I'm saying I'm not sure that the setbacks make as exactly the same sense for the battery energy storage as they would for solar.
So we might want to look at screening options as well, as opposed to the larger setback.
We have screening options. Screen's already included.
I get that, but lessening, whatever. Lessening the setback
I
and
think-
increasing the screening. Either way.
I think the one thing you'll run into is that some of these systems could, I mean, while they might not take up as much area, they could become much larger systems. And there might be some concerns from neighboring properties, you know, as to the sites of those. And because of the fact that those particular installations you cannot have vegetation close to those installations because of fire hazards, you know, there would be probably limitations on what types of screening would be applicable and how, you know, how much you could probably put on site.
Okay.
All right. Well, you know,
We need to look at it some more.
We did solicit some feedback from this one developer just to see if any of our requirements seemed like out of line for the realm of possibility for developing one of these, and we haven't heard anything. So again, maybe let's leave well enough alone, and then if somebody needs to come in for variance or there's a problem, that's certainly an option. Does that make sense? You know. Again, we're going off of the model local law that NYSERDA put forth, and we've tweaked it a little bit based on feedback from John Hamilton and from some of the other inputs that we gotten, and then, you know, the rest is kind of up to us. And allowing this to be a floating zone gives us, you know, the authority to make it make sense wherever we think it makes sense to be placed, and if it doesn't, then they don't get the approval.
Right.
Well, also remember what you just did with the solar energy system local law, right?
Yeah.
Goji and Maryknoll came in, and they had a proposal, and it didn't conform to the zoning that the board enacted. But once the board looked at it in practice and realized, okay, you know what, we think we need to have the height be a little bit higher than what's originally permitted in order to allow for emergency access. And so as part of that application, you amended the law. There would be nothing to preclude you from doing something similar in the future. If someone came in and said, you know, we're proposing this setback, we think this is reasonable in this zoning district because of X, Y, Z. I mean, that's always an option too.
Okay. So with that,
So just for
Okay.
clarification, so are we expanding to the additional zones?
again, I don't think it hurts us to
Okay.
have it, to allow it, but if, and you know, the board feels differently, I just don't think it hurts us to allow it. We're not saying we're going to say yes, definitely. We're going to say based on
Right.
an application and based on a right sizing and based on, you know, no negative feedback, if it makes sense to do so, we should allow, you know, that's it. I mean, we're not making any decisions except for to decide to, the opportunity to
That's correct.
consider it.
That's all it is an opportunity. Okay. And does
Everybody
the,
okay with that?
would the board like me to look at the setbacks?
I'm actually fine having the setbacks as you have it proposed.
It's fine with me. I mean, let's, again, like I'm saying, that's what I'm saying. Let's try it out. If it becomes an issue, then we can revisit it.
Okay. And just
Good
for
by me.
and just for clarification, these are for the larger units. These are not for the
Correct.
smaller units.
Yeah.
All right, then the other question, so the other comment, there's two other comments that came in. One dealt with the 20 feet of spacing from the fence, spacing from the fence area for vegetation. So in the model law, it specifically had areas within 10 feet on each side of the tier 2 battery energy storage systems shall be cleared of combustible vegetation and other combustible growth. And then this is also again featured with the tier 3, the tier 2 having the and no vegetation within 10 feet because of the combustibility and the fire hazards. I increased it to 20 feet. And comments came back, and this was specifically comments from the applicant right now before the planning board, that they believe that their current plan has less than 20 feet. While it might be a little bit more than 10 feet, they're recommending that we reduce it to 10 feet again, as opposed to 20 feet. So I originally just increased the setback just because of the fact that this prevented, at least in my viewpoint, that as vegetation grows, prevented from this constant having to maintain that particular vegetation from crossing that 10-foot line. And so 20 feet, I felt, gave it a little bit more comfortability with growth and not being close to the actual battery energy storage systems. But based upon what the applicant has already provided, that they're planning to have their vegetation closer as a screening method than having it 20 feet away. So basically, it's just it's just a difference of 10 feet between.
Do I hear 15? I don't know. I mean,
it doesn't. I mean, I put it in there to provide a little bit more space, but I understand where they're coming from, and actually having been out on site and actually seen what they're proposing and where they're probably proposing to put the vegetation, 10 feet I think would be fine. If the board wants to go back to the original.
I'm fine with that. If you're fine with that and you're the person who suggested 20 and you're fine with 10, then I say yay to 10.
Yeah.
If it's
So-
consistent, it makes sense to go with 10.
Go with your recommendation.
And the only other comments from the applicant on our local law dealt with the decommissioning bond. The decommissioning bond right now is 125%. And they had a question as to why we would have it at such a high amount. And the 125%, that language for the decommissioning bond, which is specifically the amount of cash deposit or other security, shall be 125% of the cost of the removal of the battery energy storage system and the restoration of the property. That specifically came from our current solar energy systems law and the decommissioning bonds required for that. So I just used the same exact language, figuring it should be applicable to both storage systems.
And is there nothing in the model local law about that?
No, the model local law actually has different regulations dealing with bonding, but I figured we might as well use similar language and what was already put in place for the solar energy storage systems.
Okay. I feel like I need a little more information about what was in, why it was different, because our solar went off of the NYSERDA's original model law also. So why would it have been different in their two model laws? If there's not some reason.
I don't know if they, I actually don't know if they ended up, what NYSERDA did with their original solar systems law has. My
Okay.
biggest concern is that since they're both going into your zoning code and they're
Right.
both dealing with storage systems, we have 125%, you know, they just raised the question of why 125%.
Okay.
I mean,
Well,
I think to a larger extent, I mean, it's 125%. I mean, I would keep it
okay.
and
Right.
keep it consistent.
I mean, I don't know exactly, I can't, this came from the recommendation of NYSERDA and the solar energy, but municipalities, when they, retain contractors are required to pay prevailing wages. And so it may make doing something more expensive than if it's a private property owner, if the town were to have to go in and decommission this because the applicant didn't. That could be a possible reason as well.
Okay. I mean, it sounds reasonable to me, so just leave it unless anybody has any issue or suggestions. Other than that. Good?
All right, so other than that, those were the only comments we received. And the applicant before the planning board right now felt that they would be able to meet all the other requirements in the proposed local law. And we did not receive any other comments on the proposed local law.
Okay. Fantastic. So with that, hopefully we can be ready to, with a resolution maybe for the 26th as well for this one. I know that we haven't had it.
We haven't gotten comments back from county planning. I think
Oh, okay, fine. Okay, so well, we can be hopeful. We were anticipating that the comments that we get back from county planning will be, this is up to you, which is what they usually are.
Generally, in this situation, they would say it's a matter for local determination, but statutorily, we have to wait 30 days.
Okay. All right. Well, so what do you recommend? We have the public hearing set for January 26th, and we can just go from there.
Yeah, I mean, we can have a resolution prepared. The board can always table it if things come up. If the board wants on the 26th, they can use the closed public hearing, they can direct a resolution and be prepared. I don't think it really matters.
Okay. Sounds either or. That's
Right, so-
that's fine. Whatever
Right, so
we have time to get done.
I'll have
Go ahead.
revisions for both these local laws within the next day or so.
Great. And then, yeah, I think it'd be helpful. And then we can get those posted. And then, if we want to, we can continue to receive comments for the next couple of weeks. If there's anything that comes up, we don't have to, we can table the resolutions.
Okay.
And if we don't get the county back. Okay.
All right, sounds good. Any other
Fantastic.
questions or
All right.
anything before comments? All right. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Valerie. We appreciate all your hard work on this. And it always seems like there's so many details and you really just take us through them all so well and appreciate your careful consideration of all the comments.
Thank
Help
you. I
guide
try
us.
to. It can get complicated sometimes with all the
It sure
legally.
can.
That's Christy's job.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much again. And we're hopeful that we can get all these things squared away, close to the
I
end of
do
January.
think
if not
you're
prior.
at especially with the B legislation and the battery energy storage, I think you're really there. I think we might get a few other comments here or there, but I think for the most part, all the comments that we've received
Right.
so far have been incorporated and adjusted.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
And, sometimes we, again, just to say, Say it again? Oh. Councilman Wiltshire, were you saying something or no?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
Oh, that's okay. No problem. So I was just going to say that, I think, again, with the B legislation, we've gotten a number of comments and, again, from different sides of different perspectives about beekeeping. And our overall goal is to make it easier for people who've already been keeping bees to do so legally in the town. We haven't gotten tons of comments from some of our known entities that they have any issue with the legislation that's being proposed. Some of our larger known entities with hives. And so, that makes us hopeful hopeful that at least this is a good starting point. If, it turns out that we find out it's really impossible for anybody to set up a beehive here in town of Ossining moving forward, or we're somehow restricting those beekeepers who have been keeping bees without complaint for some time, we will definitely adjust the law to do our best to encourage beekeeping, because as was pointed out by one of our common commenters about this, this is a way to encourage people to think more about not using pesticides and caring and, thinking about planting pollinator friendly flowers and plants and things of that nature, which is overall good for our environment and our community no matter what. So we hope that that the legislation will encourage safe beekeeping and will also be thoughtful of neighbors and if they do or don't want to have whatever, anything that might or might not disturb them. I'm not going to say that it will, but just making sure that everybody feels safe and comfortable. So with that, I think we're done discussing our 2 legislative items, and we are going to talk about our 2021 Town Board liaison appointments. We have a number of boards and committees and other organizations throughout town and the village, and we have typically, and the county and the state, we've typically appointed different board members to these different areas to sort of feel out and then come back to the town board with anything from meetings that they may attend or updates that they think would be helpful for us to know. And we're just gonna hopefully go through what we've had for the last year and to see who might be interested in either continuing with their current liaison appointments or maybe changing to something else. So I'm going to ask Victoria Caffarelli if you would take us through the list, because I do not have it.
I have it here on a Word document, so I was thinking maybe we could just take a look at it together.
Fantastic.
Okay, so we have the supervisor up here at the top, de facto on all committees. Oh, should I read through all of them, or do we want to just go?
You can if you want, but I would like to mention that the Energy Improvement Corp is no longer one of the ones that we're actually invited to serve on. They changed that, so that can go away.
Okay, that has gone away.
Great.
I think
And then Sustainable Westchester's.
Okay.
And okay.
So here as well, I think we'll have to move some things around. So we have Councilmember Feldman here, Green Ossining, OVAC, Fire Departments, Historical Society, Village of Ossining, Boat Canoe Club, T-Town, co-liaison to the Village of Ossining Water Department, Ossining Arts Project Summer Concert Series Subcommittee. Is that still a thing?
That kind of, it sort of went away, but I don't know. What?
That's a concert series, no?
It is, yes.
Okay,
Did you,
so that's still real.
I don't care.
did you work on that last year or not?
Oh, the arts project one. Yeah. I did not.
I mean, the Riscos kind of took over the coordinating of music. So I don't know if they tapped you. Did they tap you last time or not?
I had a conversation or two, but nothing big.
Okay, well,
It doesn't have to be official. It's fine.
Okay.
We can do a
I'm
little-
sure we're all involved one way or the other.
Sure.
We can do some research on that one. Ossining Chamber of Commerce. Okay. Councilmember Meyer, we have Westchester County, the IMA Committee, New York State, co-liaison to Ossining Historical Society, co-liaison to both Chambers of Commerces, and the Business Development Committee, which we had hoped to revive in 2020, but sort of got sidetracked. But we can certainly leave that there with the hopes that we can revive that once again in the new year.
Good with me, thank you.
Okay. And then Councilmember Shaw, we have IFGA, Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee, Community Equity Task Force, Rec Advisory Board, both school districts, liaison to the Highway Department, Village of Barcliff Manor, co-liaison to the fire departments, and co-liaison to Ossining CAP.
The only thing I would add is the police reform and reinvention.
Okay.
Yes.
And
And also, you have the equity, right? Okay.
Austining Police Reform and Reinvention, is that the?
I believe that's what it's called. I'd have to check that, but I believe that's what they're calling it. And I have a lot of very active liaison, so I was wondering if someone wanted to take Recreation Advisory Board.
Yeah, I'll take it if you'd like.
You're the best. Thank you.
And I think I actually talked to Greg a little bit about this, Councilman Meyer, a little bit about this, that we would try to split the responsibility for that, so that we'll tag team a little bit. If he can't be there, if I can't be there, we'll make sure that the other one can be there for
Awesome.
for Rec Advisory Board. Okay. So,
Thank you.
and thank you, Councilman Shaw, for the many years that you have served on that committee and then served as liaison to the committee. So I think actually you were chairing it right before we scooped you out for town board, right?
For a minute, yeah. And then I was here, so.
Okay.
Okay, and then Councilman Wiltshire, we have the Austining Historic Cemeteries Conservancy. Maybe should we spell this out?
Sure.
I'm just
Why not?
myself so it looks nicer. Okay, Austining Briarcliff Chambers of Commerce, Austining CAP, co-liaison to the Village of Austining Water Department, Rec Advisory Board, and Austining Boat and Canoe Club.
I'm okay with that.
Fantastic.
Okay, very good. So
That was easy.
if there's any last minute changes, I'm gonna hit save and stop sharing. And we'll have them on next week for our fabulous reorganizational meeting.
Your organization meeting. That's right. So with that, thank you everybody for participating this evening in our work session. And we would like a motion to adjourn, or I would like a motion to adjourn to executive session for personnel, advice of counsel, and contracts.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for our very first meeting of 2021. We are certainly hoping that this will be a much better year. I hope that you're enjoying our Zoom meetings as much as we are. We are going to continue to be on Zoom at least for the next month. Right, Christy? Is that right? At least we know through, I don't know, the 5th of February? Okay. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here on Zoom on Tuesday, January 12th for our annual reorganization meeting. Have a very happy week and Happy New Year to you. Good night.
Night.